will do it. Oh, would you look at that? It told me it was being recorded now. Okay, so hi to those who just came in, and I'm just gonna make sure or if you could make sure when you come in that you're muted, that would be great, just to eliminate background noise. So as I was saying, when the settlers came to what is now known as Canada, they encountered a population of people that were already here. The Indigenous people, they saw them as savages because they didn't live the way that the Europeans lived. And so because of that, you know, there was the Indigenous ways of life were very not as modern as the European way of life, and the Eurocentric way of life was seen to be the only way when they arrived. So they did try to work with them and do business with them in various ways, and trying to get the Indigenous people to conform to their ways. But there was obviously a disconnect in language and a disconnect in ways of life, and so it was a challenge for the settlers to work with the Indigenous people. Because the Indigenous people didn't have, you know, a lot of access to, or they've never been exposed to diseases that the Europeans had or have. There was disease that was brought into Canada because of the Europeans, and alcohol was also something that was introduced to the Indigenous people, that especially during the trading era, they were given alcohol for, you know, different things. So because they didn't and wouldn't conform, this became an Indian problem for the settlers. And then in 1876, they first proclaimed the Indian Act, which gave the federal government control over most aspects of the Indigenous people's lives. So that was a long time ago. I can't do math right now, but it was a long time ago. So this is what gave the residential schools their power. It was empowered by the Indian Act. The residential school system operated from 1861 prior to the Indian Act to 1996. And the primary objective was to eliminate any vestige of Aboriginality, replacing it with a Euro-Western culture, knowledge, and spirituality. So there has been quotes saying that the basic premise of residential school was to kill the Indian and the child, and to remove any notion of First Nations culture and tradition. And then this was their answer to assimilate, and, you know, basically have modernized the First Nations people that were living on this land. So in 1920, there was an amendment to the Indian Act that made the attendance at the schools mandatory. So, so this is when, you know, even if Indigenous parents were not wanting to send their children there or hiding them, so that when the Indian agent came, they didn't, you know, they were hiding them so that they didn't have to go. They then made it criminalized for those parents. They criminalized it so that those parents had to send their kids, or else they were, you know, they were threatened with jail, or they were threatened with no food, no rations, and no, you know, resources that the colonizers, the settlers, were giving to the Indigenous population at that time. So more than 150,000 children attended these schools over the years, and there was 139 schools in Canada. The last one closed in 1996. So there's today there's about 80,000 survivors in Canada. So someone in their 20s could be a survivor, like a first generation survivor of residential school today. So when people say, you know, that you should just get over it, it was a long time ago, it wasn't, you know, us or whatever. There are people that are in their 20s that have gone to residential school. So I'm just going to pause here for the information sharing, take a breath. I'm gonna ask Vanessa, my cousin, to unmute herself and share a little bit of her story. And just remember to ensure you're muted, and please respect the speaker. And also, you know, this is very challenging and difficult for people to share. So if you could just bring into your body and into your space good thoughts and prayers towards the speaker, that will give her the courage to share her story with you.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I know my cousin introduced me. I'm Vanessa Spence. I am currently in our hometown of Mississauga Cree Nation, where our relatives stem from. I'm actually speaking to you from my dad's house, and he's a residential school survivor. Excuse me. I thought this would be easy, but this is still, you know, when this first came about and I was asked to speak about my own experience, it's been bittersweet, I would say, right? It's been an ongoing search of my own well-being, I would say, finding some self-love and, you know, just trying to feel like, where do I belong? There is always that need, that feeling, I come from here, but why is life so difficult? The hardships that we faced, everything just, you know, I never gave up. One thing I know for sure is I never gave up. I got into a lot of, I would consider myself as part of the intergenerational, what do you call that, law? Intergeneration impacts?
Yeah, intergenerational right? Trauma.
Exactly. When we first heard of the children that were found, the 215, which has escalated to 500 and something now, 572, I believe, or 62. Yeah. Initially, I thought, okay, well, it didn't bother me. It did sadden me. It saddened me a little bit, but what I didn't understand, what came about in the following days is, I'm like, oh my God. You know, this is, my dad attended one of these, right? I started thinking about my dad and my own life and thinking, what these children went through. Because I would have to just tell you from my dad's own story. Initially, when I first going into self-discovery, I would say, going on about my search of my own identity. I do speak my language, which I'm very grateful for, and except I don't practice very much of my culture. I've witnessed it and I've participated in it, but I don't have my own medicine bundle, like my own. I don't use it each day. So that is just something that will come about in my life eventually. I know it will, because I dream it and I believe in it. I know it brings a lot of comfort to our people and a lot of healing. And I think that's one of the biggest ways that it'll help a lot of our people, is if we find our culture, our traditions, and our ceremonies, we will come to a true healing. So I know that that's the path I will take eventually. But I want to go back to first discovering my dad is a residential school survivor. That really just sparked something in me, right? For my own upbringing, I figured, okay, there's a connection there. There's a connection with my upbringing, connected to the residential school. Where did this trauma come from? And that is exactly where it came from. I had my first child, my only child. Just one moment. How do you use this? My dad's phone just started ringing. Okay, where was I? The connection.
You had your first child.
Yeah, I had my first child when I was 20 years old, or 28 years old, I'm sorry. That was 21 years ago I had my child. And it was from there on, I thought to myself, I want to be the best possible parent I could possibly be. And I thought, okay, where do I begin? Because I knew I had a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, and a lot of guilt and shame for the things that I did growing up, right? It wasn't good, like the drinking, the promiscuity, that ugly, ugly road. It was just chaotic and everything else. And but prior to having a child, I'll just briefly describe. I did ask my dad, but what was it like for you in residential school? It sounded very insensitive, but I do recall asking him, Dad, what was it like for you? What was it like in residential school? And survivors to this day don't really tell their story. They don't. They have not been able to tell their story. And at that time, I was actually looking after my dad because our house had burnt down, and my brother had perished in there. So I had this moment. I'm thinking, okay, I had this moment with my dad. I can learn a lot from him. Develop a relationship with him, that father-daughter relationship that a lot of us long for and a lot of us didn't have growing up, right? Mm-hmm. And anyway, I asked him, Dad, what was it like for you? He wouldn't tell me his story. All he said, my girl, I will describe to you what it was like, but I can't tell you what happened. He said that it was going to hell and back so many times. In the 12 years that he attended residential school, he just said he went to hell and back so many times that he didn't even, give me a number. And I imagined that, and it just so happens not long after that, after 30 years of sobriety, I don't know what triggered his trauma, but he asked me, my girl, let's go to Uncle's. I'm going to go celebrate with him with his birthday. So anyway, drinking is involved, right? And then as Uncle and my dad were talking, or they were getting inebriated and whatever, and I'm waiting there, being the DD, hoping he'll get home safe, and I fell asleep, and I just so happened to get up at a moment when they were arguing. So I heard a lot more than I was supposed to, and I don't think to this day my dad even knows that I heard. But he himself too was brutally sexually molested by a lot of the priests at the residential school. And after hearing that, I figured, okay, well, you know what? I was scared, I cried, and I figured, okay, this has something to do with my healing. I needed to hear that, right? Why would I wake up in the middle of this conversation? I figured, right? Mm-hmm. So I knew. I always feel things happen for a reason. I have that a spirit in me, I guess I would say, that wants to heal and help others for that matter. And before this, I told Lal, I said, I don't know if I can do this. I said, this is so hard. I thought I was ready, and maybe, I don't know. When are we ever ready? Eh? We just have to talk, and we begin to see for ourselves that talking about it is okay now. People have to understand. And then I'll get into where I started to understand my own upbringing, my own life, the way it was. It was chaotic. It was confusing. I didn't feel love for anyone or myself for that matter. Everything was just anger, so much bitterness. I hid it because right from when I was in my early teens, I worked. I felt I have to work hard to survive. Like I was on survivor mode, I guess, because there was no guidance, no guidance to life. I would say, like the parents weren't there to tell me, okay, well, you have to do this, do that, and because there was just so much chaos, so much drinking. Well, it did kind of ease because they did separate, right? But the separation caused a lot more, you know, a lot of bitterness and a lot of anger. So I don't know. We all went our separate ways as children. I would still say we were children because we weren't certain where life was going to take us. But we were all I wanted to survive. So I went on about my education, taking it here and there. And, you know, I'm happy to say I've done a lot in my own soul searching and for my own well-being. But it only began the day I understood what it was like for my dad, my parents. I imagined them for a moment. They had no parents. The abuse, the crap, the hell that they saw as they were growing up. As a child, an innocent child, their innocence was stripped from them from a very young age, as young as 6, 7 years old. Imagine that. I imagined that for a moment. And then I started to feel a connection to my parents at that time. I had my dad, and it just so happened I did some relief work as a secretary for a residential school counseling program that was situated here in our community for the survivors to take that counseling because they were going through the whole process of getting the compensation for the number of years they were in residential school. Anyway, I took on that job, and they did a lot of ceremony, culture practices, and you know, for the clients that were participating. And my dad was one of them. And a lot of times I did a lot of sharing circles. And well, my dad, he would either excuse himself or I would excuse myself because he didn't want me to hear his story, like straight up what his story was about, right? But I understood. I knew what was going on. I knew what was being said. And right from there, I gained a new love, a new respect for my parents. I don't know if I truly understood what forgiveness was at the time, but it was something I totally thought of at that moment. Is I can forgive my parents. I can forgive them for not giving me the proper parental guidance and the things that I didn't learn, that I had to learn on my own, which was very hard.
Yeah.
Right? And so there I was, 28 years old. Finally, there's a little bit of a light from this darkness that I felt I was in. And I wanted to be the best parent I possibly could be to my own daughter, who was at the time probably only 2 months. And from there, I thought to myself, you know, I want to bring honor and I want to bring respect back to our people. And I'm going to be the best parent I possibly can and teach my daughter, be a good role model as best as I can, although there was still times of struggle, darkness. But she saw that, which is, we connected as she was growing up, we connected. She saw my struggle. She saw my own chaos, that I was trying my best to do my best in parenting and living a semi-calm life, I would call it, a semi-peaceful life. But I kept going back to the hurt and the pain. And, you know, the pain, sometimes I went back to it for long periods of times, especially times when you, like, because I lost my mom in 2011. And that brought on a lot of pain and a lot of guilt. Because I hadn't, you know, for the sake of me, I couldn't remember, how many times have I told my mom I loved her? Mm-hmm. A lot of that, I love you, that comfort, it was, I can't remember if it was ever there. We were so busy being angry at each other We were so busy holding everything that happened, that went wrong. We were busy holding that against each other. And for the longest time, I had to suffer that guilt, you know. And hang on, I gotta mute myself for a minute. Somebody's here that, and she's intoxicated. Give me a moment. You want to go to a discussion about what I talked about?
Yeah.
Give me 2 minutes, okay, love?
Okay.
Just peace black.
Yeah, Vanessa is my first cousin, and her dad is my uncle, my mom's brother. Oh, you're not muted. I'm gonna mute you, Vanessa. And yeah, I'll share a bit of my own story in a bit, but when I was younger, my mom would take us up to, well, my mom and dad would take us up to Nelson House. It's called Nelson House, or Nisqually Cree Nation. When I was 6, I remember that was my first memory of my mom's home community. So I've known Vanessa since then, and I always felt at home there. I always felt like whenever we went there, you know, that the people that I met or my relatives would always be welcoming there with open arms and happy to see me. And I just never, it was just such a weird feeling because I didn't live there and I didn't really know the people there, but I always felt like I was welcome to be there. So so she still lives there and does some really great work. She's worked with the youth, and her daughter actually lives in Kelowna. She's going to UBCO right now, so she's trying to become a teacher, but I think it's pretty lonely for her during this pandemic to, you know, learn from your dorm room on these calls. That's what they've been doing all year. So it's been a challenge. Are you back?
Yes, I'm here again.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, where was I? Talking about forgiveness and just understanding understanding where my parents came from. Like I took away the name. Like I imagine, okay, take the name mom off and dad off, and this is Emily and this is Jimmy. These are children that were in residential school, and this is what they were taught. And I taught of all the like everything negative, everything like they had to learn a different language, for heaven's sakes. They had to learn a culture that wasn't theirs. They were made to believe that their culture was wrong, that it was evil, that it was the devil's work, that it was worshiping, you know? They were like, how can you imagine what makes, like, how a child feels when they're told everything they are is wrong, right? And I tell you that shame, that feeling grows into your children, because I'm one of them. I didn't practice in my ceremonies. You know, I'm grateful I got to learn my language because I did have a grandfather that was not in the residential school system, and he practiced a lot of our culture, and I remember seeing them. I'm fortunate enough that I got to witness a lot of the skinning the animals and preparing food, and the way they prepared food and were able to preserve it. And he didn't sing or he didn't perform any ceremonies, but he knew a lot of what cured what. I wish I could remember. I'm hoping that they do come back to me. But a lot of the stuff from the tree, I know, cured a lot of ulcers and sores and stuff like that. So I do remember some stuff. And my language, of course, he kind of ensured that we would learn my language. So I am very grateful for that. And I'm glad I got to experience that because he lived with us starting from a very young age. And I'm also grateful that he kept me safe from a lot of what was going on during the drinking, during like the off days, I would call them. Because my parents, don't get me wrong, you know what, they were also on survivor mode. I call it survivor mode because a lot of what was going on in the back of their mind and their broken hearts and everything else, they wanted to survive. They worked. My mom was an educator. My dad was a community consultant for many years. He did a lot of community development, right? So they strived to be the best they could be, but a lot of what was missing was that proper guidance. Like, you know, they nurtured us with gifts, with just ensuring that we were safe, that we were under a roof, that we had food. But because I'm also an early childhood educator, one of the things I know that nurtures a child's brain is the comfort and the words of "I love you," and nothing else. You know, yeah, you can flourish us with a whole bunch of material stuff and stuff that we need, but the comfort and that being with your parent, just telling each other that you love each other. They didn't get that, so they weren't, you know, they were uncomfortable showing that love in that way. When you think of like for myself, I told my daughter, I love you every day. I would hug her. And that's exactly what was missing from my childhood, was those I love you and those hugs. You know, they did provide us everything else, shelter, food. The most important thing that was left was that comfort of knowing that they loved us and that they said it every day. Because in a child's mind, as young as it is, as it's trying to find out what this world's all about, when they live in constant fear that something's going to happen, it does something to us. It breaks us apart piece by piece. And we have to alone. Sometimes like God, the people I've met along the way, I'm thankful for them, that I was able to put myself together to be the person I was or I am. I still have my self-doubts. I'm still struggling with self-love, but it's work in progress. I'm proud. And I'm proud of who I am and where I come from. I can talk to my dad with love and respect today because I do know exactly what forgiveness is. Because his upbringing was very harsh. It was a lot of punishment and there was abuse, physical and sexual abuse. My siblings haven't told their story yet, so I don't even know like what it was like for them, because there was kind of a lot in between, because my mom lived over here and my dad lived over here, and you know, some of the siblings went here and some of us went here, so there was a lot of separations. So really, right now, we are just seeing a lot of the trauma that's going on in siblings' lives. Not a good thing to see for some of my siblings, but the siblings. Sorry, pardon me, but I do see where and what we can. And one of the things I know is that we have to start believing that there is love, that we are loved. You know what I mean? It is one of the hardest things that it's been hard for me to feel.
Yeah.
You know, someone could come up to me and hug me and say I love you. To me, I'd be like I'll stiffen up when somebody tries to hug me, because it wasn't done. Something that was done for me at a young age, right? So at a young age, it's so critical to live it and feel it. And when you past a certain age, usually around 11 or 12, when you're trying to feel things and discover things and it's not there, then it's something that we have to find on our own most of the time. But we do, believe me, we do meet a lot of people along the way, that there's a purpose, there's a reason for them being in your lives. And I've had a lot of people in my life over the years. I'm 49 years old. And for each person that's been a part of my life, had a tremendous impact. And I could say that for Lal too. I don't say it as much because it's still something that I haven't learned to appreciate and to tell people I love them for everything they are and for what they've brought into my life. But I guess it will just come about eventually. So I guess that just one of the main things to be able to help our nation and our Indigenous people heal is to find that self-love, and first it's to forgive. We could say that we will forgive them, but we have to find what it truly means to forgive a person, and we have to know that. And that's how I learned to forgive what had happened to me in my own childhood. I understood it is because they too didn't know. They too weren't shown. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'll end it right there because my chest is starting to feel really heavy.
Oh, thank you so much. I know it wasn't easy for you to. Just a few minutes before we started, Vanessa was like, I don't know if I can do this. But I'm so grateful that you were able to share a little bit, and we love you so much and appreciate your words. So I raise my hands to you for your journey so far, and sending you lots of love as you continue on this journey.
Thank you.
I'm gonna mute you.
Okay, and I'll listen in a little bit, but I am gonna take a break for just a few minutes.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So I don't know if anybody needs to take a break. I am going to have one in a couple of minutes here in my slideshow, but if you need to, walk away and take a breath, have a glass of water, then please go ahead and do so. It is hard to hear, some of the things that people have to share about their experiences, and so it's okay. More about residential schools as a tool for assimilation. So oftentimes, sorry, it says my internet connection's unstable, so I just wait for that thing to go away before I keep talking. So often the schools were away from home communities, and they were not allowed to have any contact with their home, with their relatives, with their mom or dad. So there was no continuity of relationships. There was no continuity of language, culture, or traditions. The children were, as you heard from Vanessa, they weren't allowed to, they weren't raised by people who in these schools who showed them any love. They were dehumanized. And because of that, they faced physical, sexual, emotional, and psychological abuse, as well as malnourishment and neglect. So they weren't fed proper meals. They were given, the people who ran the schools would have these, beautiful meals with meat and breads and fruits and vegetables, and the kids were given, it was like slop. Like, you can't even say that it was like oatmeal or anything like that. And sometimes it was just a soup made up of all the leftovers of that week, and that's what they were given to eat. And so they experienced malnourishment, and then neglect, as Vanessa was alluding to, about not having those that love, that connection to love. And then a lot of times the kids didn't realize that their parents were being forced to put them there, that they felt a disconnection and an abandonment and attachment issues because they couldn't understand why their parents would send them to these places where they were beaten and they were hurt in many different ways and not taken care of like they were in their home communities by their parents. So that's so some more information about the buildings. So they were typically not built properly. They didn't have proper heating. They didn't have proper ventilation systems, unsafe plumbing and electrical work. So there was lots of overcrowding. There was a lot of kids put in, one space. So their deaths resulted from abuse, overcrowding, the poor sanitation, inadequate access to foods. In some cases, there were schools that were used for experimentation on how little a person needed to eat before they died. Some people say that the Indigenous children who were experimented on, that's how the Canada's Food Guide came to be, was the limitations of nutrition for people. So they, in some cases, were given, they weren't given proper foods, and they were given certain vitamins and minerals to see if that kept them sustained and alive, and sometimes it didn't, and so that was their experiment. They were being experimented on for that. And then they had poor health care, so they wouldn't go to a hospital. There was often an infirmary in the schools where they would just got put in there, whether they were sick or they got beat up really bad or they were bleeding from sexual abuse or anything like that. They were just put in the infirmary, and it wasn't even necessarily a nurse that was in there looking after them, and oftentimes they died from whatever they were dealing with, for whatever reason they were in the infirmary. And then there was another population of children who died trying to escape, who ran away in cold conditions and winter conditions where they froze to death, or they just never made it home. So those are some of the reasons why there would be death at schools, in these schools. And then we don't know any schools today that have graveyards outside on the school grounds, but these schools all had graveyards because the kids were dying at unprecedented rates. They were buried without proper burials, markers, or even documentation on how they died. And sometimes the parents weren't even given notice, and if the parents just were told that they ran away, or they just had no idea what happened to them. And any documentation that still exists some of it doesn't have, it's not complete. It's inaccurate information. It doesn't have names, doesn't have ages, doesn't have reasons of why they died. It in some cases it could just have a list of the name is blank, and then it has girl or boy, and sometimes it doesn't even have an age. So in the 20s, a lot of the documentation from residential schools was destroyed by the federal government. So there's a lot of information that's missing, and any information that we still have is not accurate. So this is just an example of what they were trying to do. So on the left side of the screen is what an Indigenous boy looked like when he came to the school, and the right side is what they wanted him to look like when he left the school. So they were using these practices of residential schools to kill the Indian and the child. So I'm just gonna give everybody a little break right now before I share a little bit of my story, because I haven't seen Trish come in yet. So we'll just take 5 minutes and go stretch your legs and have a little break, and take a breath, and just however you need to get grounded, feel free to do that. And we'll be back in a few minutes. All right, I am back. I'm not sure if everyone else is back, but I am. um, yeah, so just yeah, when you are hearing stories of residential schools and the atrocities that have happened in our country to children as young as 3 years old, um, it is really, really important to take the time you need to take to feel the feelings and just get back to grounding. So um, for me personally, I've been grieving for since the day it was announced. It was a lot more than I was prepared to handle, and I thought, having all of the knowledge and all of the experience so far in my life, I thought, I would be prepared. You would think I would be prepared for it, but I wasn't. I wasn't at all. It wasn't. It was. I knew the stories. I knew about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and their work, and I knew about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two Spirit and their work. And I see day to day what the intergenerational trauma looks like in my work that I do, and but nothing prepared me for the evidence. And so, like I said, when I started this workshop, that working on this has been, helpful for me to heal from the grief I was feeling. So just a little background about me. Most of you might follow me on Facebook or Instagram, so I do share a lot of my journey on there. So you might know a lot of it already. Um, my mom went to residential school when she was 11, and she went for several years. And like Vanessa, she didn't want to share the stories with us. And anything that she did want to share was just that it wasn't that bad. And so as a child, I had no idea I was Indigenous. I had zero idea. My mom married a non-Indigenous man from Cape Breton. He was an engineer. He came to northern Manitoba, where my mom was, and swept her off her feet, so to speak. And they went from coast to coast, from Canada to other countries. My older brother Scott was born in Africa. My older brother, my oldest brother, was born in BC. So they were all over Canada, and they moved around. So my nomad nature is because of them. And but I grew up mostly in Nova Scotia. I say that because I spent 15 years of my childhood there, but I've now lived in BC about that long. So I don't know where I say I'm from now. I just say my husband says I'm from Nova Scotia because of my accent. But anyway, so I don't carry the accent. I only get it when I go back to Nova Scotia or I talk to somebody from there. So I had no idea I was an Indigenous person until somebody called me an Indian in grade 4. And I remember the guy's name, and I remember the house he lived in, and I remember how dirty it felt for him to call me that, and how I felt like he was saying a bad word to me. And I went home and I cried to my mom, and I said, this guy called me an Indian today, and she looked at me right in my eyes and said, "Well, you are an Indian." And I had no idea what that meant. I was in grade 4, and so that is just a little piece of evidence to me when you look back on my entire life of how I was assimilated. I wasn't living. I never had to live was forced to live in a community. My parents were moving all over the place, and although, my mom did make friends in the Indigenous communities that we lived near. And I would, visit those communities with her and make friends from there as well. I didn't have that connection until later in life. And then in high school, I was always hanging around with non-Indigenous people, and but they were racist towards the Native people that were nearby, that lived nearby or in the communities around us. And I always felt really uncomfortable about that, because I didn't like have, so if they're being racist about those people, then aren't they being racist towards me? But I would always be told by friends, oh, but you're not like them. You're not like those natives. And so that also made me uncomfortable, because I didn't understand that. And this was in high school. I didn't understand. And then I also wasn't always accepted by the Indigenous community either. And people my age would, tell me that I was whitewashed, or that I was a half breed, or the just some derogatory terms that I would be called by both Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. So it was a challenge for me to try and sort all of that out. And so, but my life as a child was, my parents taught us adventure and how to love being on the land and things like that. But I didn't get, I got a lot of love. I know that I was loved. My mom and dad loved me, and I felt that. But I always felt like I was I didn't feel like I was attached to anything or any place. And so it was a challenge for me to figure out my identity. Like I just had the hardest time trying to figure out who I was. And of course, when children and youth don't have an attachment to their identity, they're going to identify with people who are the same, who don't have an who are having a hard time identifying who they are, or they've had neglect in their homes, or they've been abused. Those are the people that I ended up hanging out with as a teen, which obviously led to alcohol use and like not good activities. I wasn't out playing baseball or going to ballet. I was skipping school and drinking in back roads and things like that as a teen. And so as I grew up, I didn't really know who I was. I had the hardest time trying to figure out who I was. And I worked for an organization that worked with adults with developmental disabilities. And when I moved to BC with my 7-year-old son, who I raised on my own until he was 13, for meeting my husband. But when I was working for that organization, I felt like I was really making a difference for adults with developmental disabilities. And I went on to advocate at the provincial level. And from there, I thought, I had a moment where I had to leave. I actually left BC and I went to Nova Scotia for a month. I went to hang out with my brother and just kind of, reevaluate what I was doing with my life and what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I realized at that time, I was around 30 years old at that time, that I wanted to get to know the First Nations issues and support First Nations people in Canada and in BC or wherever I was. And I wanted to learn more about my own First Nations culture at that time. And so that was almost 12 years ago. And I decided, when I came back from Nova Scotia, I applied to a couple different organizations, and I got a job as a child protection worker at an organization in Vancouver that worked with Indigenous children and families. So from that point on, I started to learn about ceremony. I started to learn about smudging. I started to learn about different things. But up until that point, I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church, and I did not like God. There was some points in my life where I even said I was atheist because I was so upset with God and the God that I was taught about. And in the Roman Catholic Church, I felt anyway, I don't know what it's like now. I haven't gone to a Roman Catholic Church mass in a really long time. But as a child, I felt like the God that we were taught about was very punishing and judgmental, and always was going to, we were going to go to hell for our sins and things like that. And so everything that I did was full of guilt and shame from childhood on. And so couple that with not even knowing who I am as a person, I made a lot of, challenging and not so good choices throughout the years that made my life a little bit more challenging, but at the same time made me who I am today. So I'm grateful for all of those experiences. And so when I started to do child protection, and started to learn about all this stuff, I started to open up my heart to a different kind of God that wasn't judgmental and wasn't punishing. And I really felt at home with Indigenous people when they were teaching me things about ceremony and the things that they did for prayer and all of those things. I really felt like at home with those people and those ceremonies and those things. So I continued to follow that sort of, and I'm a displaced Cree woman, so I live right now in the Secwepemc territory of Secwepemc people, but in Vancouver it was Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh, and I've lost the other one. Somebody here might know it. Anyway, the Coast Salish people. My husband is actually Coast Salish, so anyway, so I'm always learning about I've always had to learn the traditions for the people, whose territory that I'm living on. I wasn't necessarily learning about my own Cree culture. And so that's what really piqued my interest into sort of that's how I got into Indigenous, the world of learning about my own Indigenous identity and feeling like I started to become part of something. And in the meantime, my mom, I would ask her every once in a while questions about her experience in residential school, and she just didn't want to share with me. And so now, my mom passed away 3.5 years ago from cancer, and she lived with me for a couple years before that. But she worked as a nurse for 40 years and then retired and moved here with me and my husband in the Caribou, BC. And she wanted to, hang out with us and our kids. We had 2 younger kids and 2 more kids, I should say, aside from my David. And her and Chase, my youngest, were the best of buds, and she wanted to live out her retired years with her grandchildren, who she didn't really always get to be close to or be with when because she was working all those years. She did a lot of traveling though, so she did come to visit wherever we were, and wherever my brothers were, she'd always visit them. So when she died, I was having a really hard time with alcohol, and sorry, it's always hard to talk about when she died because she was so important to me, and she meant, like, she taught us a lot about how to be strong and courageous, and just to be ourselves. But for a long time, I didn't feel like I could be myself because of all the different experiences I had over my lifetime. But it wasn't until she passed and she gave me the strength to be, who I'm really supposed to be. And when she died, I learned a lot more about who I am because she was able to help me quit drinking, and I like I say that because when she was alive, I would ask her if she thought I drank too much, and she would always say no, but I don't think she realized how much I was drinking, because she would, she didn't know that I continued drinking after we stopped having our couple drinks together or whatever. So anyway, I think that after she passed, she could see that I was having struggles with alcohol, and helped me quit. And that was January 28th was 3 years sobriety. And so because I was able to quit drinking, I was able to start really getting into prayer and meditation, and really connecting with Mother Earth, and using the medicines that we use, or that I've been taught to use, and uh, connecting with Creator, who is Creator is everywhere. Everywhere I look now, Creator is there. And so because of that, I was able to connect on a spiritual level with not only my mom but my ancestors as well. And they have been teaching me for the last 3 years how to, like, who I am, and what to do. And none of this is me. Like, when I get into prayer and meditation, and I ask, like, if I'm having a hard time, like I've been having for the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or however long, it seems like forever since we found the first 215, I've been asking, what can I do to be of service, instead of getting angry and frustrated and resentful towards everybody, because that's where I was. This is this is this is the result of that, being guided to provide you with a learning opportunity, instead of sitting in darkness and continuing on um, the oppression, because that's what continues today. There's still assimilation practices and oppression that happens to the Indigenous people today. And so that's how I got here to this. That's how you guys got here. That's how I got here. And it's been a long journey for me, but also like the most beautiful journey I've ever been on in my life, to return back to my spirit, and to have my spirit come back to me, and to be able to listen and connect with my spirit, to be able to be of service to all of you, to Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, because I have felt both sides. I have felt what it's like to be discriminated against because I'm Indigenous, and I felt what it feels like to be discriminated against because I'm not, because I'm non-Indigenous. I'm all about love. I'm all about healing, and I'm all about helping people learn so that they can um, go forward in a good way. And that's what we're here to do today, is to just continue to share our stories, and to have you listen and become allies for people who need our voices to be amplified and heard, because there's still a lot of racism out there, and we're all part of a system that continues to be racist against Indigenous people, and continues to oppress, and continues to assimilate, in some ways, um, Indigenous people in this country. So that's just how what it looks like for me as a daughter of a residential school survivor. I mean, I wasn't told about what who I was and what I was from the beginning, and that changes with me, because my boys know who they are, and what they are. And today was Indigenous Peoples Day, and and the school that they go to, their classes chose to go to a Bible camp today, and I refused to send them to school today, and instead had them stay home and learn about some of the Indigenous history about residential schools, and why kids had to go, and things like that. So that's just a bit about my story. And I mean, obviously there's lots more to it than just that, but it's every Indigenous person in Canada has a different story. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on, I don't speak for all Indigenous people. And we're all on different timelines. I mean, I'm 3.5 years sober, and it's taken me, 42 years to get to this point in my life. Whereas some people are just starting out their journey, and some people are not even there yet. And so, even I was saying on my stories earlier before I came on here, I have two brothers that I was raised with, and then another brother that was adopted. My oldest brother, Jack, was adopted to a family in Missouri, I want to say, or maybe, that might not be it, but and then I was raised with two brothers, and all four of us have very different journeys of, our finding who we are and our identity. And all four of us are on different paths and in different stages of our journey, and we've learned from different teachers. So I obviously don't look at me or don't look at Vanessa and think that that's the whole story, because every story is going to be a little bit different and have a little bit different of an outcome than ours. So thank you for listening to that. And I wish I had a Kleenex here to wipe my nose, but I don't. Thank you. Maybe I'll just use my shirt here. Okay, so just to, I'm just trying to be aware of the time. So I don't think that we have Trish. So she was going to talk about her experience as a 60 Scoop survivor. But I don't believe she's here, so that's okay. She was coming back from Alberta. So I'm just going to continue on and just talk a little bit about the 60 Scoop. And okay, yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I'm going to disconnect with the group now.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Vanessa, I love you. Thank you for coming.
I love you too. And everyone else, thanks for listening. I wish I could have been a little more stable and able to share a little more, but we share what we can. Thank you. And I'm glad you guys got the opportunity to hear a little bit of some of the survivors' stories. There's more out there, and it's just an unbelievable time. And I know in my heart, my spirit is telling me that more healing and more connection with all cultures. And I've always believed as I was growing up that we learn from each person, regardless of their culture, regardless of their background. We take something from each of us, from all of us together, full of this universe, this life that we call. And all of our beliefs are to be good and to love one another while we're here. And I live with that as much as I can each day as I move on. I still have my moments, and we all do, right? Like we'll all share this, but it has been hard. It's been a lot of grieving, and a lot of trauma came about again after the hearing of the deaths, and it's been a lot of things have resurfaced, and it's been a struggle. I've noticed a lot of my behavior and a lot of my attitude has changed a little, but I'm slowly getting back my spirit and just being out there trying to live my life as best as I can, as always. But I wish you guys all the best and wonderful journey of love and self-discovery, and we're all in this together and we're all connected somehow, and I love feeling that connection with everybody. Thank you guys very much. And
thank you.
But I can see the faces. I just couldn't get to my office today, so I could have zoomed. But are you going to be sharing your slideshow or I'm recording it so I can send it. I'll put it in the group after if it records the whole thing. If you want, you can show whomever's watching in a picture of me, just so they can put a picture to my voice.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I have you lost. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, so yeah, we'll just finish up here with the 60s scoop. So while the residential schools were still open until 1990, or the last one closed in 1996, but while that was happening, they an era they called it the 60s scoop, where it was between the 60s and the 90s. Child Protection Services were apprehending Indigenous children from their communities at an unprecedented rate. And sometimes that would be out without the knowledge of the parents or the families. There was no opportunity to discuss it. It was just happening, where they were being taken from the communities and placed with non-Indigenous families. So 70% of them were placed with non-Indigenous families. So this continued the loss of their connection to language, culture, and community. And then non-Indigenous caregivers would often hide the identity of the child to the child. So the child would have no idea, who they were or where they came from, because they wanted to avoid discrimination from other people in the communities that they lived in. And then just briefly on today's child welfare system, which I am a part of, there are now more Aboriginal children in care today than they were at the height of the residential school system. So children who are Indigenous are 6 times more likely to be removed from their home than non-Indigenous children. There's been a lot of work around this in child welfare where I'm working. I work for an Indigenous, it's called an Aboriginal Delegated Agency, or a Delegated Aboriginal Agency. And so in the 2000s or late 90s, the Indigenous communities wanted child welfare to come back to their own communities, and they wanted to be responsible for their own children and the protection of their own children. So the Delegated Aboriginal Agencies were created as a stepping stone to that. There's still a lot of healing and capacity building that needs to take place within some communities. So some communities aren't able to fully take on that responsibility, but the Delegated Aboriginal Agencies role is to help them to build their capacity and to help connect the supports and services from within the community, and then supporting children to be returned to their communities and to the land that they're from. It's I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've worked for 2 different Delegated Aboriginal Agencies and 2 very different experiences at each. One was urban Indigenous, and this one is not necessarily urban, it's more rural. There is some urban Indigenous families that we work with, but more rural and more within the communities that I work in. And so we do a lot of, where I'm working now, we do a lot of close relationship building with the communities and working with the communities on planning for children. So we try not to remove children. That's I'm the team leader, and that is the last resort for me. I always try to work with, and every Delegated Aboriginal Agency has a sort of the same priorities, is to work with families, extended family, community, keeping somebody else in the community, whether they're related or not, before ever taking them out of the community. And so that is sort of what there are big changes that have been happening in the child welfare system for Indigenous people. But in 2014 there was more Aboriginal children in care than there was at the height of the residential school system. So the things that happened, not saying that that there's abuse and neglect and all of those things happening, but there's still the removal of children from their home communities and their families, which has results in a disconnect of identity and culture and traditions. And so it's still continuing today. So there's still a lot of intergenerational trauma. A lot of the kids that are being removed is because their parents are survivors of residential school, or their grandparents are. And so they're, like Vanessa was talking about, they're feeling the intergenerational impacts of their ancestors or relatives going to the residential school. So this has all led to a population of the first people of this land missing their language, culture, and traditions, missing their inherent ways of life that was peaceful and respectful of Mother Earth, women, and children. It's increased in the incidences of addictions, perpetuation of abuse, cruelty, and trauma for women and children. And then there's the socioeconomic, the economic impacts of poverty, lack of adequate housing, supports and services for Indigenous people that continue to go on today. So there's not a lot of support. I don't know if you've seen in the news or in any of your social media platforms, but there's still communities in Canada that do not have clean drinking water. There's still First Nations communities that don't have access to clean drinking water. And that just blows me away. Like I remember when my mom's community in northern Manitoba got plumbing and clean drinking water, and it was so crazy that, you know, in my lifetime, there's still communities in Canada that don't have that. So so that continues today. So when you hear people say, you know, just get over it, we can't just get over it. It's still happening. The things that happened, you know, in the 1800s, 1900s, all the way up to 1996, it's still impacting people today. You know, like I said, there's 20-year-olds walking around out there that went to residential school. So to say to just get over it is just like is gaslighting, and it's not, you know, it's not possible to just get over it. There's multi levels of healing that has to happen, and so many different things, and it can be so overwhelming to think about. So I know that you're probably going to walk away feeling overwhelmed about all of this and what you can do about it. But the thing is, we have to come back to healing ourselves. We have to heal who we are, question our own beliefs and values, and become aware of the cultural differences with the people around you, and that's how we can become an ally. That's what we can do about this. And so just a little bit about cultural sensitivity and awareness. It doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in another culture's values. It just means you're willing to ask open, honest questions, seek understanding, and demonstrate empathy instead of judging, you know, people around you. And judging people around you can be unconscious, depending on what you were taught about your own culture and your own values and beliefs, that you can have an unconscious belief. And so questioning why you have that belief. For example, if you saw a drunk native sitting outside of a liquor store, what do you feel about that? Like, what do you think when you see that person? And not to, like, you know, again, not to guilt or shame you, but if you have any feelings towards that person at all, where you're judging them for being a drunk on the side of the street outside of the liquor store, bumming change or whatever, then ask yourself, why do you have that judgment? Why do you feel that way? Where did that judgment come from? Because it doesn't mean, you know, we're all raised with beliefs and values and different teachings from when we're little all the way up that you know, give us this sort of sense of values that we don't necessarily have to keep anymore. Like, if it doesn't fit with who you are today, then you don't have to keep. You can reevaluate, you can discard what doesn't work for you, and, you know, change that value. And that's part of the healing journey. So how to be a good ally, recognizing and accepting your privilege. So a lot of people get triggered by the term white privilege, and it's not a discriminatory or racist term. It is, you know, if you didn't have to fight for your rights in a Supreme Court of Canada, then you have privilege. There is a United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and the first right in that declaration, I just read it yesterday. grab it quickly to tell you what it says. So this is something that you might want to have a look at if you're interested in learning more. Is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It looks like this. You can get it online. But the first one, it says Indigenous peoples have the right to full enjoyment as a collective or as individuals of all human rights and fundamental freedoms as recognized in the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and international human rights law. The fact that somebody has to go to get, go to the Supreme Court of wherever and get that put into a declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples, that's like absurd. That they need to have something that says that they get to have the same rights as everybody else. So so that's what privilege is. If you just, you aren't discriminated against when you go to apply for a job, or like you walk into a store and you're not followed around because of your skin color or what you look like, you have privilege. So it's not something to say that that's bad, but just recognize that you have it. And a lot of people aren't willing to recognize that. And so it's really important to even just start to even look into that, like what is white privilege, and find out more about what that means. So self-reflection, dive into why you have certain beliefs, like I just talked about a slide ago. And then knowing the history and cultural context. So not expecting Indigenous people to teach you, or it's not their responsibility to teach you about what's going on for Indigenous people, but taking that responsibility on yourself. There's tons of information out there, and I'm going to leave you with some resources in a minute on what you can go dig deeper into. Always listen and follow the community. So one of the things you could do to be a good ally is understanding the territory that you live on, like whose territory is it, and acknowledging that that's not your territory, that's the territory of the Indigenous people that lived there for thousands of years. So, and then listen to the community on the land that you're on, like what is important to them. And so if you live in an area where the pipeline is coming through and that's something that they're not okay with, like listening and understanding why that is, and how you can be of service to them in that fight, if that's what they're focused on in their community. And then amplifying Indigenous voices. If you have to go, don't worry, you don't have to tell me that you're leaving. It's okay. I know we're just a little bit late, but we started late. So amplifying Indigenous voices, and like don't make it about yourself, just and especially do not speak for them. So a good ally doesn't speak over, but doesn't speak for or over, but amplifies the voices of their Indigenous neighbor. And then, so how can you help in a meaningful way? When I say never show up empty-handed, it could mean like, showing up to help with labor, or like maybe there's an event or something, asking how you can help, what you can do to be of service. And then being respectful of elders and knowledge keepers. So if you are asking elders and knowledge keepers for information or for teachings, always bring, a gift or an offering for them. And you can ask, whatever community, or you can ask somebody and that knows that elder or there's knowledge keepers what an appropriate gift could be. But most of the time, as I've experienced anyway, tobacco is always a welcomed gift or offering for somebody for teaching you something. So seeking consent and permission always, so not just one time asking for permission to come to an event, for example, in their community, but every time. being mindful of people's time and energy. And these are just basic, like, you know, to be a good human, not just a good ally, but how to be a good person when you're working with other people or wanting to know another person's culture, or wanting to learn more or be a part of their, you know, events or activities. Just being mindful of their time and energy and asking consent and permission. That's just being a good human. And then being an ally doesn't mean being a savior, but just standing alongside in solidarity and empowering Indigenous voices. So here's some resources that you can, you know, learn more information from. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was commissioned for a few years. I don't know when it started, but the final report in the 94 calls to action was in 2015. And so up until 2015, they were collecting survivor stories, and Vanessa talked about the common experience funds, and people were getting funds for their experience in residential schools. And so in order to get funding, they had to share their experiences. Some people were prepared to share their experiences and some people were not. So if you weren't prepared to share your experience about your abuse or any like sexual abuse or anything like that, you got a common experience payout, whatever you want to call it. But if your experience was, you know, worse and you were prepared to share it, then you got more of a payout than the common experience. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has a lot of those survivor stories within the actual report, but the 94 calls to action is what they put out in 2015, and I think there is 9 out of 94 calls to action that have been completed to date, and that was 6 years ago. And then the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a good resource. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Children, Women and Girls and Two-Spirit Inquiry Final Report is also a good piece of information to learn more about. There's some movies to watch here. We Were Children. If you're going to watch We Were Children, only speaking from experience, just really be prepared for some, you know, very, very disturbing things that happen to children in that movie. And I'm sure most of the movies that you watch are going to be disturbing, but I found that when that first came out in 2012, I wasn't prepared to watch it, and I just watched it recently. I think it was 2012. Don't quote me on that. But I just watched it recently, and it's very difficult to watch. Indian Horse is also a book, and was made into a movie about one person's experience in residential school. And then Muffins for Granny and Stolen Children, Truth and Reconciliation was done by CBC. So I hope you were able to get some sense of learning and information from that presentation. It's not always easy to, you know, share personal stories. And so if you are looking for survivor stories, you know, I would direct you to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because it's not easy. Like if somebody's not ready to share their story, then, you know, I wouldn't be asking them for it. And just to move forward, you know, in a good way, make sure that you're taking really good care of yourself tonight. I know in some time zones it's really late, but if you can take a moment to just, you know, get some deep breaths in and maybe go outside, get some fresh air, and just make a decision tonight, you know, based on the emotions that you're feeling, like what actions you're going to take to move forward to help Indigenous people in this country. Not to help them per se, but to like empower them, you know. And there's a lot of healing that needs to be done still for all of us, not just Indigenous people, but all of us. And you know, I keep coming back to this thought of like, if the Indigenous people are feeling ancestral trauma deep in their cells, in their DNA, then the people who perpetuated this abuse, that was happening on Mother Earth, which we were all connected to. And so you also can in some ways feel that abuse that was experienced by Indigenous people, but you could also feel the people, the ancestral DNA of the people who perpetuated that. You could also feel those things too, right? So there's pain that comes down through our ancestral lines, and it's not just Indigenous people that need healing, it's non-Indigenous people too. And I'm really grateful that you were all here and prepared to learn about this with an open mind and an open heart. And I hope that you're able to, take that willingness and move forward in a good way for all of us. And I do feel like that this is the start of something really wonderful that's going to happen in this country, and that there's going to be more and more babies found, and it's just going to continue to be in our faces. So and that's what we need. We can't just brush this under the rug anymore. It's here and it's in our face, and our ancestors knew we were ready. And although many of us were, we're still not there yet in our healing journey, there are many of us that are on our healing journey, and are many of us that are learning our culture and traditions, and many of us that are learning our ceremony and praying for the collective, not just Indigenous people, but the collective of everybody. And so I'm just going to leave you with this it's a music video of some children who made a song for, and it was made 4 years ago in 2017. But they're children that went to the school in Kamloops. The children go to the school in Kamloops now. So I'll just pass this over to you guys. Oh, I guess I better share it. Hear it? Can you give me the thumbs up if you can hear it? Okay, thanks.
Not long ago, our people were taken away from their homes. Our culture was fading, left on our own. So many changes, a future unknown. Forced into praying, put in the dark and left all alone. Living in fear, shadows were cold. Some ran away and some made it home. Our people were strong, our people were bold. In a dark room, they were feeling punished. It's a hard truth that we have to stomach. Gave an education, but it really wasn't. Now we look ahead, we can start the drumming. Learning language through song and dance. The pain they felt, let's honor that. By being great and keeping track of what elders teach, let's walk the path. To Shuswap Nation, the future is in our hands. It may take some patience. It is our home, it is our land. In a lifetime, we'll celebrate who we are like every day. There's so much knowledge in the way we live our lives, so we're giving thanks. We won't forget you. We won't forget you. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Oh, cow, cook beat, oh, cow, cook beat. Found a love, now everything is fine. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Now we feel free, dreaming and wishing. We walk on the land, hunting and fishing. Our language is taught through drumming and singing, but it's still so sad. Our people go missing. Is there an end to all of this madness? Finding the strength through all of this sadness. With troubles aside, emotions we balance by showing our voices. We got the talent. This is the start of a new life. We'll undo the wrongs and we'll choose right. traditions. We sing and rap for the mission. The destination is living and innovation for the children.
In a lifetime we'll celebrate who we are like every day. There's so much knowledge in the way we live our lives, so we're giving thanks.
We won't forget you. We won't forget you. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Oh, cow cookie, oh, cow cookie. Found our love, now everything is fine. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Our soul's a place we go. We feel safe and we feel better again. A home away from home. We're happy here and to be together again. You've shown there's always hope when tough times get you down. Let us begin and walk the longest road. We are here with you. We'll never forget. No, no, no. No, no, no. We'll never forget. Never forget. Never forget. We won't forget you. We won't forget you. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Oh, cow cookie, oh, cow cookie. Found our love, now everything is fine. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light.
All right, that's it. Thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate all of you for joining us.